So I watched The Bride, and about halfway through the movie, I had a very strange realization. Not only did I have no idea what was happening anymore, I wasn't even sure the movie itself knew what it was trying to be.
No. Wait.
And the crazy part is, this film actually has a fantastic premise. Because when I first heard the concept, Frankenstein's bride waking up in 1930 Chicago trying to figure out who she is, I thought, okay, that could be interesting. You could do gothic horror, social commentary, maybe even a tragic love story about identity and belonging. You know, an actual movie. But after sitting through the entire thing, I can safely say this might be one of the strangest big studio films I've seen in years.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And honestly, I'm not even sure where to begin, because this movie feels less like a film and more like Maggie Gyllenhaal accidentally filled the contents of her dream journal after eating expired cheese at 3 a.m. And instead of someone in the editing room stepping in and saying, hey, maybe we should turn this into an actual story, everyone apparently nodded politely and said, yes, this is cinema. Now, the basic idea is that Frankenstein's bride wakes up in 1930 Chicago and tries to discover who she is, which on paper is actually a great premise. Instead, what we get is what I can only describe as a 2-hour interpretive art performance where characters wander in and out of scenes delivering philosophical lines like they're auditioning for a moody perfume commercial, while Christian Bale, who I swear looks like he's wondering how his agent talked him into this, shuffles around looking like the only person in the building who thought they were making a Frankenstein movie. And every time the story almost starts forming something resembling a narrative, the film immediately derails itself with another surreal musical sequence or theatrical monologue. Like the screenplay is terrified that if it stays coherent for longer than 5 minutes, someone might accuse it of being entertaining. They even reference Mary Shelley in the film.
Not a great plan.
And I'm telling you right now, if Mary Shelley somehow found out what they did with her creation here, her skeleton would claw its way out of the grave, dust itself off, and politely ask if everyone involved could please stop adapting her work forever. And the craziest part is, the movie treats itself like it is delivering some kind of profound artistic statement, but the only profound thing happening is the audience slowly realizing they paid money to watch what feels like a gothic cabaret rehearsal that accidentally got distributed as a major motion picture. Now, plot-wise, I use the word plot very generously here. The story basically follows the bride after she's brought back to life and dumped into Chicago society, which immediately becomes a parade of strange characters, underground clubs, philosophical speeches, and moments where the movie pauses so hard to admire its own symbolism that you can practically hear the soundtrack whispering, "This is deep." The bride herself is meant to be discovering freedom and identity, which again, good theme, solid idea, except the movie presents this journey less like a character arc and more like someone flipping through a scrapbook of experimental theater scenes. One moment she's wandering through smoky clubs where everyone looks like they escaped from a Tim Burton after party. The next she's delivering dramatic speeches about autonomy while the camera stares at her like it's trying to win a cinematography award. Meanwhile, Frankenstein's monster, played by Christian Bale, drifts through the film like a confused Uber driver who picked up the wrong passengers and is now too polite to kick them out of the car.
How? I don't know!
And every time he appears, you can almost feel the movie remembering, oh right, this was originally a Frankenstein story, before immediately wandering off into another symbolic detour about society, identity, and whatever else the screenplay scribbled down during its philosophy phase. And look, none of that is inherently bad. Movies can absolutely explore themes like identity and society, but here it feels like the film is so busy being artistic that it completely forgets to be engaging. Scenes stretch on forever. Characters talk like they swallowed a poetry anthology, and the pacing moves with all the urgency of a snail, taking a reflective walk through an art museum. By the halfway point, I genuinely started wondering if the movie was building towards something. Maybe a tragic climax or a powerful emotional payoff. But instead, it mostly contains its parade of theatrical moments where characters deliver speeches that sound incredibly meaningful until you realize they're basically saying the same 3 ideas over and over again in slightly different accents.
Wow,
And remember earlier when I said that halfway through the movie I stopped understanding what it was trying to be? This is exactly the point where the realization kicked in, because the film keeps presenting moments that feel like they should lead somewhere important, but they never quite connect into a coherent story. To the movie's credit, the production design is undeniably impressive. The costumes are elaborate, the lighting is moody, and the set looks like someone spent months trying to recreate the atmosphere of a gothic painting. But atmosphere alone doesn't carry a film, and eventually you start noticing that beneath all the style, there really isn't much narrative momentum holding everything together, which becomes especially obvious once the movie drifts into its final act. At that point, the film clearly wants to feel like it is reaching some kind of emotional or philosophical breakthrough, but instead it mostly highlights how little the story has actually progressed.
Okay.
The bride is still searching for meaning, the characters are still speaking in cryptic metaphors, and the plot still feels like it's circling the same ideas introduced an hour earlier. It's honestly a strange viewing experience, because the movie never completely collapses into chaos, but it also never quite finds a direction either. It just sort of floats. Scene after scene unfolds like pieces of a stage production that were loosely stitched together, giving the entire film the vibe of an experimental theater show that somehow wandered onto a movie set. By the time the credits roll, you're left with the sense that you've watched something that desperately wanted to be profound, but never quite figured out how to translate that ambition into a satisfying story. Which is a shame, because the premise had real potential.
What does that have to do with it?
No. He's got a point.
A reimagining of the Bride of Frankenstein, discovering herself in a strange new world, could have been fascinating. Instead, we get something that feels less like a reinvention of the myth, more like a surreal art project loosely inspired by it. So if you're someone who loves experimental storytelling and stylized filmmaking, you might still find something to appreciate here. But if you walked into The Bride expecting a compelling modern take on the Frankenstein legend, you might leave the theater feeling a bit like the monster himself, confused, slightly stitched together, and wondering why nobody involved thought to double check whether the experiment was actually working before flipping the switch.
Holy shit.
And honestly, I'm curious, did anyone actually enjoy this movie? Or did you leave feeling like you just watched a 2-hour art installation that somebody insisted on calling a film? Because for me, The Bride isn't just disappointing. It's the cinematic equivalent of ordering a gourmet meal and being served a beautifully plated bowl of interpretive salad.